The soundtrack for Moss is coming out this Friday, and I'm so excited about it. I love this game. It's a VR platform. It's available on any VR platform out there now, and it features this little tiny mouse named Quill with all these animals like Quill and her forest friends. I got to work on this over about a 9-month period with all the amazing people at PolyArc, and it was probably the most fun I've ever had doing a soundtrack. So what I thought I would do is a series of videos talking about a couple of different songs that sort of defined the way the soundtrack ended up being. And I'm going to start with an actual song that has a vocal in it called Home to Me, because this is the very first thing that I wrote before I started any of the score. I don't know why I wanted to write a song. I've never written a song before. I've never done lyrics before or anything like that, but there was something about this game. I went and visited PolyArc in Seattle for a couple of days, and on the way back, even on the plane, I started just kind of hearing Malukah, my favorite vocalist in the world, singing this melody, and it just seemed like a vocal-inspired melody was kind of what the main theme needed to be. So what I thought I'd do today is show you the track and kind of break down a lot of the instruments a step at a time. To keep things brief, we'll probably do the band today, which is basically everything that I played. And then I'll do another episode where we'll feature all the soloists, which is Malukah's vocals, Kristin on all of her woodwinds, Jeff playing violin, Alan singing backup, and that'll be next time. So, this is the song from beginning to end. Before I play it, just so that you're not completely confused, give you a little bit of a navigation here. I always have my piano track at the top. So vocals up top, here's Malukah, all the pink. Alan's doing accompaniment vocals, he's the green. I've got violins, violas, cellos, and basses, basically a small string section. This is the MIDI, which I then rendered to audio down here so that I could EQ it and mess with it a little bit. And then these are actually Jeff's violins doubling first violin, second violin, and viola, the exact same thing that's being played right here. I had him double it. I did some volume automation to kind of match up to make the strings sound as live as they can. I used chamber strings from Spitfire. Really, really great sound. We'll do comparisons and everything when we get down to this track. Then we've got our soloists down here. Here's Kristin's oboe, which I think is the only woodwind she played on this particular track. And there's the original MIDI information for the oboe and the violin. I sent those to Kristin and Jeff so they could play them. And violin tracks, I actually sent Jeff 2 different microphones for this project. So we had a AKG 414 and a Bee's Knees, which is basically a KM 184, just kind of a boutique version that makes it sound more like a KM 84. A little less highs, a little more mid-range presence. We'll talk about that when we get there. And then everything below that is the band. So acoustic guitars and harp and dulcimers, ukulele, accordion, bass guitar, the drum set, and the percussion. And just to give you a quick overview, these are the effects. Now don't lose your mind seeing this giant block of effects. We'll go through it, but there's actually, it's like a little bit goes a long way on every one of these. Everything's doing a tiny bit to add to the sound. So this is the same tracks you just saw, top to bottom. We're just going left to right. There's all the vocals. There's the violin, and you can even see I chose the Bee's Knees for the violins and I chose the 414 for the viola to double the MIDI strings. Oboes, here's the band, ukulele, and down here we have the drum set and the percussion. So what I'll do is zoom in just a little bit, and I'm going to play the song from beginning to end, and to keep it interesting, I'm just going to pull up as quickly as I can in time with the music the different tracks that are sort of being featured, and I'll pop the plugins up so you can see them working. I just figured it'd be a good way to do an overview.
dark wood falls before me, with broken bough and blackened leaf. I stand where trees meet with the sky, and in the stillness find you by. When all the paths are overgrown, and evening falls with crimson glow, into the forest I will fly, and in its shadow find you by. Darkness falls across land and black sea. I can hear your call, calling back to me. The deepening sky with nighthawks too, hanging upon the crescent moon. The wind draws strong, it pulls me near, and in the dark I find you here. The crumbling wall and mossy stone, mere memory of forgotten home. The shadows past, nothing to fear. Though we're apart, I feel you near. Darkness falls across land and black sea. I can hear your call, calling back to me. All alone, but for storm, sky and tree, I will bring you home to me. And when the moon has taken flight, so far above the treetops high, I'll search the dark wood far and wide, pulling me closer to your side. Darkness falls across land, sky and sea. I can hear your call, calling back to me. All alone, but for storm, sky and tree, I will bring you home to me.
So that's the track. And it's just, you notice pretty much everything's live. The strings, there's a little bit of MIDI strings. Most of what you're hearing is actually what Jeff doubled. And being able to do a song like that with all live musicians just makes all the difference in the world. And having their performances, not just me playing everything, really, really made it special for me. They completely and totally sold it. All their contact information and everything is down in the description. So what I thought we would do, before I get down to breaking down into individual tracks, is I want to talk a little bit about the harmony for this song. I've mentioned before that I'm very much a harmony kind of person. That when I'm thinking about music, like when I'm thinking about writing this song, I was thinking about the harmonies first, before I thought of any melodies. And I figured it'd be a good example with this particular tune to really dig in and show you what I was talking about. So first of all, I'm in minor, which is pretty obvious because we've got that nice E minor. And actually, one important thing to mention is I worked really closely with Malukah before I really started doing any sketching or anything to figure out a good key for her vocal, because I knew I wanted to have almost the range of an octave, not quite. I think it's a minor 7, but I wanted her to be able to go up high and slip into her falsetto fairly naturally. So we were I was anywhere between D and F, and we ended up choosing E. I think originally I might have written in D to start out with, and she said she preferred to be up a whole step, so we ended up switching to E. E minor, D, E minor, D, G, E minor. I love the idea of having chords that help tell the story. They're not just block chords. Chord, 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 chord. I like harmonic movement that has a rhythm to it. So that's why for this you've got because to me that's already telling a bit of a story. Now the melody that I heard in my head was really based around those chords. I like the idea of that kind of minstrel sounding pub band sort of. It just felt like it was the right style, felt like it belonged in that kind of universe. I love the idea of the musicians, like just picture Malukah and Jeff and Kristin and Alan and I. We could be in a little bar as little tiny mice in like a mushroom house playing this music in the game. I like the idea of it feeling like it was part of the universe and it wasn't something that was kind of pulled in with a giant orchestra or electronics or anything like that. I wanted to feel grounded in the reality that was the world of Moss. So the melody is really just outlining the chords that I've chosen. So if we look at these first 4 bars, literally you've got from the 5 of E minor to the 1, and then that little jump is on the D chord, and it goes back down to the E. So really, you're looking at just outlining a triad. And then here, look at that, it's just outlining a triad. And then there's a G right here, super briefly. Back to the E. What I like about doing something like this is you've got this little hook, ba-bum-bum, ba-bum-bum, and the little 3-note rise, and then here, and then here, and then here. Between those two things, the little lift and the kind of triadic outline, I didn't feel a need to have like lots of non-chord tones or passing tones or do anything fancy. I wanted it to sound singable. This was before I even worked on the song, but I still had Malukah's voice in my head. So a lot of my melodies come down to outlining the triads of the harmonies that I've already picked. Even here, when we're in E minor, I'm actually foreshadowing the next chord. We go to G, but this is a G triad. Here we go to a D suspension, but this is a D triad. So we're going to G, but we have a nice and then we're going to D, just outlining the D triad. And then we've got a nice A, kind of a A9 chord here basically, because it's got this B. And it just sits on the A for 3 bars. So that's the first 8 bars of the verse. Now in the second 8 bars, they're actually pretty much identical, except here, instead of sitting on an A9, it goes to a B suspended and resolves down with the major third. And this is the only place where there's actually a major 5 in the tune. So right here, this is the same lick. But it goes to the B suspension. And that's setting us up for the chorus, which goes back to E minor with a 7 in it. I'm going to play it with, where's Malukah? With Malukah's vocal here. So you can see how the chords work and how the melody is outlining the triads of the chords. So this is what I mean when I say that I think of harmony first. I'm thinking of the chords and the harmony and the structure of the harmony in the song, and then I'm putting the melody around the chords.
The dark wood falls before me, with broken bough and blackened leaf. I stand where trees meet with the sky, and in the stillness find you by. When all the paths are overgrown, and evening falls with crimson cloak, into the forest I will fly, and in its shadow find you by.
The other important harmonic thing to mention here is we're in Dorian, which is a whole other episode to talk about, but it's not a minor 4, it's a major 4. That's what's giving us that really happy kind of feeling. You've got the E minor and the G, but then there's an A major. That gives it a really nice uplifting feeling, and to me sounds sort of magical. Dorian's a lot of fun to play around in. I'm going to fast forward to the first full version of the chorus. And again, with these chord progressions, goose egg, goose egg, goose egg, but it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. I like the idea of having, again, the rhythm to the harmony itself. And on the back end too, there's a 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. To just give it a little bit of extra motion. So I'm going to play through the piano part here and keep the rhythm of the chord movement in mind as it's going. And again, the melody is just outlining the chords. So we're in E minor here. We're missing our chord because it's a little, there we go. E minor, just a 5th. We go to a G. This is actually a G major 7. Here's the 7. A. Back to E minor. Same melody the second time. Except I reharmonized it. So it's the same 4 bars, but the second time you've got the C major 7 in here, which is just a really nice change in color with the bass dropping down to the C, and it's the only time it pops in there. And that gives it a really fresh kind of a feel because you're used to this A, happy A chord, so when you get this C, oh, you can hear that, right? It's like having a regular A triad because it's got the C sharp in it because it's a major A and it goes to the C major 7. Now you've got a C natural in the bass, and I know they don't play right next to each other, but just hearing them next to each other, it's this, oh, it's this really, really nice kind of a feeling.
Darkness falls across land and black sea. I can hear your call coming back to me. All alone, but for stone, sky and tree, I will bring you home to me.
One last thing worth noticing, or noting. One last thing for me to note, and you to notice, is we actually have an 8-bar phrase in the first half of the chorus. So we've got 8 bars here. Now when we go to the second half of the chorus, it's the same chords, but it's only 7 bars long. So when we do our D to B minor 7, it should be going back to the A suspended 4 and an A resolution, but instead it jumps into the bridge. The second half of the chorus is never 8 bars. It always cuts 1 bar short and either goes into the bridge or goes back to a verse or goes to kind of the middle 8, just E minor building section that we had. So that's the general overview of kind of how I think of harmony and how I feel like melody fits within the harmony. And I might be beating a dead horse to a certain extent, but I just don't want people to think that I don't like melody or I don't care about melody. I just fit the melody around the harmony first. And maybe that's the way most people do it, and they just think of it a different way, and they're thinking of the melody and the harmony's already in their head. But for me, the harmonic language is just really, really important, and it's the kind of thing that I start all of my songs with. So why don't we take a look at the band? Because the way this song really started was with this. So that's me playing drums. I started with actually just a sampled drum thing from like Abbey Road drums, just so I could do a sketch, and then eventually played the live drums in. I think I did a second pass of live drums, just so once I kind of knew the song, I wanted to be able to put the right fills and things in there. So this is with no effects. I think it's probably worth noting here, if we zoom in really close and put it on 16th notes. See, this is a little late, that's a little early, That's late, that's early, early. There's a flam that's late. Same thing if you look at the bass guitar. Early, that one's on time. The point here is a little early on that one, a little early there. This is live music. This is live musicians, okay? It's me being a live musician times 10, but I didn't want this to be a perfect, you know, modern, like chopped up and perfectly quantized kind of piece. I wanted it to sound like a band playing, and bands do not play perfectly. The inhuman aspect of quantizing really makes me crazy sometimes. So I love imperfection, and I really wanted it to sound like a live performance of a band for this kind of a thing. Which is why all these waveforms are a little forward, a little backward. Same thing with everybody up here. The oboe, all the guitars, everything's natural. I might have scooted a couple of things here and there if I needed to, but the point was, it was because it sounded a little off, not to quote-unquote make it perfect. By no means do I ever want to do that, really, to anything. So the drums, what we can start with, if we just listen to, say, the overheads. Had a little API added to bring out a little bit of the top end, and my favorite FabFilter EQ to scoop out a little bit of those mids. And then, I don't know if this was an accident or not. I feel like maybe there should have been one on both of those channels. What are we doing with this EQ? Nothing, 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 nothing! That's probably why there isn't one over here, because I'm not doing a thing with it. So let's just go ahead and turn that off. We don't need it. So that's it for the overheads. And if we go to the kick on its own, I really love this API channel from Universal Audio. First of all, API is probably my favorite in terms of mic preamps and compressors and EQs and everything. There's just something about the color. It's American made, and it's kind of a little punchier and more aggressive. I think maybe being a drummer, I really appreciate that. Their EQs have a lot of color and kind of muscle to them. The compressors are amazing. The filters sound great, and the gate as well, which is what I have this right here on all the drum tracks, a very musical gate to just kind of get rid of some of the extra sounds in the background. Now this is kind of the secret weapon of the kick. Let me turn this on. Yeah, and it's only EQ. It's the low end and the top end, and I just have it boosted all the way. That's all that it's doing, but this is without it. And this is with it. And I can't get an EQ to sound that good. That's why I ended up using that plugin pretty much anytime I do kick drum. And then this is probably just another little extra EQ. So it looks like I'm just ducking off a little bit of the super lows. And the snare drum, you hear what that gate does? It's taking out everything except the smack of the snare. This is without it again. You can hear the whole drum kit. And then now, since the microphone's pointed directly at the snare, it's the loudest thing on the signal. So I can gate everything else below a certain threshold. Plus I've got some EQ going on as well. And another instance of Chris Lord algae. Looks like there's a little bit of, nope, I don't even think it's on, it's at 0. I think I'm just using the lower EQ here. Oh, yeah. Okay, so it is doing a little bit. I think it's just engaged, but not pushing more. It's in neutral state, but it's got a little bit of compressor and the treble bite, and then the lower kind of thwack of the snare is being pushed right there. So this is without it. Yeah, what a great plugin. 1176. You'll see me do this a lot with compressors, especially the UAD compressors, because they literally have a sound to them that you don't even have to be compressing anything. You just put it on the channel, like the Fairchild or the LA2A, those tube-based compressors. Just put it on the channel and it changes it and makes it sound as close as you're going to get to running it through like a Fairchild or an LA2A, because that's the big trick that producers do with hardware. A lot of times they'll just run it through the hardware without even processing it, quote unquote. So the needle's not moving, but they're getting that kind of analog mojo and tube warmth. A lot of times with my compressors, I'll have 2 or 3 sometimes even on like vocals, for example, and they're all doing just a little bit. This is kind of more of a catch-all. See, it's compressing over here. I've got an API compressor on it with like 6 dB of gain reduction, which is a lot. So this is just more like mojo and the tiniest bit of gain reduction. And then on the snare only, I've got a plate. Now the snare low is pretty much the same idea. What I'll do is just play it, and then I'll turn these guys on. So this is isolating it with some EQ, same idea with some extra EQ and compression here, and then it looks like I wanted a little bit of extra gating, so I have the Pro G on there. And it's going to be the same idea with the toms. None of these are turned on, they're all bypassed, and I'm using the API for a gate, a compressor, an EQ, and a little bit of volume adjustment. Now, to hear the toms, it's probably better if we go back to that chorus. Let's start here. You can hear how much that cleans it up. I think there's a slightly different EQ on each one of the toms. So like if we look at tom 1 and we look at tom 2, the EQs might be, they're the tiniest bit different. A little more low end on the high tom. But a lot of times what I end up doing is getting the top tom working with this, and I copy it down to the others and then listen to hear how the other ones sound and then tweak them from there. So the one thing that that's really great, that I love, that I think we should be able to have turn on automatically here, is this AMS reverb, which is basically Phil Collins in a box. So you've got this nice non-linear reverb, which is like a gated reverb. And I imagine that's something that we will talk about in some other episode. I love Phil Collins, I love Peter Gabriel, and between the two of them they came up with this great thing that was an accident that they discovered with the talkback mic on a console, and having these super kind of distorted drums with the gate like closing on them really quickly. But that's for another episode. So I've got that sitting there as a send. All my purple are basically sends. So that's sitting waiting for the drums, and I think the drums are the only thing that are being sent to the reverb. And I don't have all the drums. I don't have the overheads or the low snare. It's just the high snare and the toms. So I can turn this off on everybody, and you can hear it without it off. On. So you can hear what it's doing. It's got a super cool character. I think the only other thing we might be missing on the drums, let's go to our buses, is a little bit of reverb. So I've got the Percussion. You can hear how it's kind of filling out the low end. That's the biggest thing I love about the Percussions, is the amount of low end that they have. And then ascend to the affix. And it's just a little bit, just send in a little bit. And this is the Percussion controls. So that's my hardware insert, and then this is the plugin that I use to control what reverbs go where. So I've got 3 Percussions, and I'm using Studio B Close, Studio B Far, which are my favorite 2 close and far presets. Like, sounds like amazing microphones in a really great large room, and then Large Hall, which is these are pretty much the 3 that I use all the time. It's just a matter of tweaking the reverb times a little bit, maybe changing this guy, which is the low frequency cut. See, sometimes I have no low frequency cut, so it's all the low end here, a little less low end here, and a lot less low end here. The idea is the further you get away, quote unquote, from the positions, close, far, and then hall, the less low end you're going to get. You're emphasizing some of that proximity effect with the up close mics. So why don't we take a look at the percussion? And I think that might be all that we're doing for today, just because I don't want to prattle on forever. This is just a little tiny djembe that I got, believe it or not, at the Atlanta Zoo. We were in the gift shop, and they had these little djembes that were like this big for, I think, $30. And I went through and I played every single one. I was like, this is the one that I want. And I've used it on everything. I've used it on Tomb Raider, I've used it on Far Cry, I've used it on Moss now, plus probably 3 or 4 other games. So, you know, don't ever put down those little instruments that you see like in gift shops and things, because a lot of times they end up being priceless. So I think all I really have on this guy is a little bit of EQ. With EQ, a lot of times I do this. I find that kind of fundamental frequency and pull it down a little bit, just to, especially in the mid-range, to help clean it up. Now, I'm definitely a big fan on cutting as opposed to boosting. To my ears, when I turned that EQ on, it sounded like the instrument got brighter, even though I was not boosting a single thing. I was cutting kind of mid-range and upper mids in certain areas that's kind of harmonically rooted to the instrument with those fundamental notes, and it makes the brighter end of the instrument kind of shine through a little bit more. And then some compression. This is a fantastic plugin to use on percussion. It's very similar to the LA2A, where there's not really a lot of controls. You're basically just controlling how much compression you want and where you want it to kick in. That's pretty much it. I mean, I'm sending to the affix. We'll see what kind of a difference that makes. That's obvious. Super big difference. That real top end sparkle, I love to have it. And then this is the first Percussion, which is set to Studio B Close. What a great room sound. I really, really like that. And a lot of times, and I'm pretty sure I did it on this song, I'll take, when there's 4 percussion instruments and a drum set and a bass guitar, and I'll have sends to the same reverb from all of them, so it sounds like they're in the same room together. And here, I think the only other thing playing is the shakers, which doesn't have a whole lot on it at all. Some compression. I know compression can be hard, especially if you're just starting out and you're trying to figure out exactly what it's doing and how you're supposed to set it up. And a lot of times, I start with something like this, with a part that's chicka 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 chicka. Even if you look at the waveform, you can see you've got these loud bits and then these small, shorter bits in terms of the height of the waveform. And what I want to do is I want to bring the loud bits down a little bit and I want to bring the short bits up. So instead of going chicka 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 chicka, I want it to sound more like chicka 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 chicka, so that the volume is a lot more even. And that's exactly what this is doing. If you listen to it without it, hear how the accent sounds like it's really poking out? Now listen to it with it. It's a whole lot smoother. That's the general idea behind compression. I also wanted to mention all of the percussion was recorded with this little beauty right here, which is a Telefunken small diaphragm condenser tube mics. There's a little tiny tube in here, and it's actually got interchangeable capsules on the front. I'm just using the standard cardioid. But when it came to recording, literally, if I had it sitting right about here, I was just kind of playing percussion right here. And I gave it enough distance so that there was a little bit of air, but I knew I was going to be using the Percastes for the reverb. And I think that includes the triangle. You can see it's a pretty even velocities here. Velocities, like it's a MIDI instrument. Pretty even strike action here. The triangle player did a good job. So it was just a matter of doing a little bit of compression and doing the same send on the Percaste. And you've got it placed in the same room. And we've got some coconut maracas, which are literally just that. They're coconuts that have been turned into maracas. And the shakers actually are, if we get to the end where they're both playing at the same time, they're going through a bus that has a reverb send on it, but that's pretty much it. So the idea is they can play together . And I've got them panned left and right, and then the reverb is kind of helping put them in the same room together. I hope you heard how sort of sloppy that is. And I mean sloppy in a good way, not sloppy in a bad way. You'd never be able to hear that one shaker a little bit early here and there in the context of the whole song, but it helps add liveliness and imperfection to it to make it feel like a band. Okay, maybe just to wrap up this video, what I'm going to do is solo all the drums and percussion and just jump around in a couple of spots, and you can hear them together with all the effects turned on and the reverb and everything. I think that's a good stopping point for today. So next video, we'll focus on the rest of the band, and then depending on how much I end up talking, we might also get to the soloists.